Today we'll be talking about visualizing complex systems. If you weren't here last week, that's okay. We'll do a quick recap of what we spoke about last week. We just did a quick introduction to systems thinking and why it's helpful in design. So a little bit about me. I won't cover everything. My name is Abram. I've been working as a designer and researcher for social good for about 5 years. And I've been running these coaching clinics for about, maybe I want to say 4 weeks now. We've had quite a few people, I think, that have been here since the start, like Chen Yu. And yeah, worked around the world basically to design interventions, understand systems, and coach teams. Cool. All right. So quick recap about last week. So last week we spoke about, like I said, a quick introduction to complex systems. We said, a complex system, we used Donella Meadows' definition of what complex systems is, and it's an interconnected set of elements which are organized in a way to achieve a purpose, right? And we talked about how the purpose of a system, like say the healthcare system, isn't necessarily even though we'd like to believe that the purpose of the healthcare system is, to take care of people who are sick, that might not necessarily be the way that the system is organized. We gave some examples of complex systems. So I spoke about healthcare, transport, and employment as examples of complex systems. Someone also mentioned, I think it might be Pia, that mentioned that a complex system could also be the human body. So we said that why it's important to care was basically around that systems thinking can help us identify what the right problem to solve is, right? And then design can help us solve the problem in the right way. And we'll talk a bit more about that today. And the best way that I know to understand complex systems, the first way is to visualize it, because that helps you kind of have a shared understanding across a group of people of what the system looks like, who's involved in it and how it behaves. Act on it. So, identifying the intervention points, create interventions that are fail safe so that if you fail, it's not catastrophic, and then basically learn from those experiments. Does that make sense so far, especially for the people that weren't here last week?
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Feel free to ask questions in the middle. I'm pretty chilled. And yeah, if you have a question, a few other people probably have it as well. So I created this slide to talk about the concept of zooming in and zooming out into a problem. So basically, and also to talk about like how systems thinking and design thinking relate. So systems thinking focuses on, it zooms out to see the whole system and who's in the system, how they're interacting with each other. But really it's focused on what's the problem here and what is it that we're trying to solve, right? So for example, if it's say an emergency room that's getting flooded with lots of people who are coming, it zooms out to say, okay, what's happening across the system? Maybe, for example, these people who are sick unnecessarily don't feel like they're necessarily in an emergency, but they don't have, a regular GP that they can visit about small problems. So small problems compound and they become big problems, and all of a sudden they need to visit the emergency room. So again, it looks across the whole system. So, you talk to GPs, you talk to, people with first aid, you talk to people who are sick. You go to the emergency room and talk to the people there and talk to the, clinicians and stuff to understand what's happening across the system. So that's zooming out. Design thinking really, which I think is one of the biggest kind of attractors of design thinking, is that it focuses on people. And this is pretty important because it allows us to empathize with people and also, feel like the change that we're doing is helping someone else. So design thinking focuses on the people that are affected by the problem and what their experience is like. And again, that framing of zooming in and zooming out is really helpful because it's kind of intuitive way, you're zooming out to look at the system and you're zooming back in to understand someone's experience in that system and how different elements of the system affect their experience. How's that? Is that all good? Okay. Yeah. Who's got questions? We might do a quick questions about complex and design thinking, just for a couple of minutes, if anyone has. Makes perfect sense. All right. Okay, we'll go to the next one. So the first activity that we have is basically asking the question of why should we, or why do we need to visualize a complex system?
One of the things that I recognized is, and we didn't really talk too much in our group, was that there's, so many reasons that you could visualize a system, right? And it's really important to, I guess, understand, like, before you even go into that visualization, like what you're trying to accomplish there, because it's not just like one purpose. And so it's really interesting to see, if you're trying to like baseline, like understand the current state, would be different than like to document it, to share out with, a bunch of C-suite people. And like, so what are you trying to do with it? It's interesting to me.
Yeah, that's really important. I think it's, I've been visualizing a lot of stuff lately, and it's like, it depends on the audience. Like the audience that you want to share it with really do define how it is that you'll visualize and the message that you're trying to communicate. Awesome. Who else wants to go? Kyle?
Sure. So I find that we eliminate a lot of assumptions. I think with my design counterparts, we have a good culture of vulnerability and talking about things we don't know and have to go investigate. But my tech and product and ops and risk and legal counterparts are kind of the opposite, where they're all experts in their field and want to tell you they know these systems inside and out. But it's inevitable that every time I put together some sort of map, they're looking at it and they discover something for the first time, or they have I thought something else. But then we're all looking at it together, and then we're all having a common understanding for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit like the elephant analogy. I'm not sure if anyone's come across that. Cool, awesome. Pia.
One thing that we talked about was that it helps you understand who the stakeholders or like potential users could be. Because sometimes people have a certain audience in mind that isn't necessarily the only audience or the ideal audience for the product that they have in mind. So visualizing that can help them figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Rihanna, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I just added one little note there. So I think like this type of visualization, like for us to understand like the different levers that play at a given issue. So kind of like thinking what are like contributing to it, what are like how it's affecting certain factors into it.
Awesome, brilliant. Cool. Hopefully, Chen Yu just came back. Hopefully we'll get to see his cat and dog. We'll see if we can get a look at that. All right, I'll share my screen again. Let's see. All right, cool. So I thought of a few reasons as well. One of them is like tell a story of what's happening and why. And I guess I saw a few post-it notes related to that, which is basically, again, Kristen talking like, if you want to tell a story to a C-suite of like why this problem is coming, or how we think we might solve it or we might attack it, then it's really important to kind of use that system map to actually tell a story of historically this has happened and this is why we're seeing these issues now in the system. The second reason, which I think is really important, is that often we kind of we get a problem statement, or someone says, oh, I have this new idea for this thing, and we don't really take time to think about what's the core issue here, or what's the root cause, like what's really causing this problem. And if we don't do that and we just go straight to design thinking, what will often happen is that we will create a service or a system or a product that doesn't really solve the problem. Sure, it's it's shiny and few people are using it and finding it helpful, but it's not really focused on the core problem. The third reason, which is like what Kyle said, is to test your understanding, but also share that understanding with other people, and get them to kind of say, actually, this is not how it works in our team, or this is not what we're seeing, or this is not what my experience is like. And therefore kind of add to it as you're testing it with other people. The next point is identify intervention points, which is basically once you kind of understand how different people and entities and organizations in the system interact, then you can say, okay, maybe if we change this part of the system, we could really flip a switch here. And then the fourth one is, the last one is act to learn. And this is really important. Like systems thinking and design thinking will never be like a flash in the pan type thing. You always have to kind of prototype and test and iterate to get to a solution that works. I wanted to talk a bit about the goal of mapping, because I think, especially if you're new to mapping, it's really easy to either overwhelm yourself or kind of, stay so theoretical that it's not that helpful, which is basically you want to be kind of abstract enough that it can be helpful and that you can create a narrative around it. And at the same time, you want the map to be action oriented enough so that you can actually identify intervention points, right? If it's too kind of full on and it tries to, map absolutely the complex system to like its finest details, it will be too complex, right? So you'll struggle to understand it and you'll struggle to identify intervention points. And if it's just, a piece of paper that you don't do anything with, then you can't really expect for change to happen. What were you going to say? Sorry, Pia?
Oh, no, you're fine. Sorry.
Oh, cool. Does that make sense so far? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yep.
So the next activity we're going to talk about is, or we're going to do is visualizing the healthcare system. And obviously I think we have, people from all around the world, which is pretty cool. So feel free to kind of, if you're stuck kind of deciding on a specific healthcare system or how it works in a specific country, just choose a country and go with it. And the first two things is basically to talk about and map who's in the system. So what people, organizations, what entities, what are the relationships that exist in the system? And then the second question is, what things do they use? So this might be like resources, it might be infrastructure, it might be, hospitals or ambulances or roads or, all the manual stuff that they have to fill out, whatever they're called. I'm sure someone knows the name. What data, right? So you've got like patient data, you've got clinician data, you've got, data on what diseases there are, or data on how different chemicals work, or how different medicines interact. So those are the two things that we're going to focus on for 10 minutes.
Hi.
Phil, how was that?
Pretty cool.
And that was a lot. We like this healthcare is a big system. You only gave us like 10 minutes.
Oh yeah, we're gonna go back again. It was just designed to get the juices flowing. Any thoughts about how the group worked, or interesting things that you didn't think of that the group shared?
I thought it was pretty interesting because we started off by trying to list all the elements, but then quickly we realized that just takes up all the time. We didn't even get to playing around with the relationship arrow. No. And also I was also mentioning that it's interesting to do a complex map where there are not just like people, organizations, and institutions, but you also added like stuff like purpose or shared beliefs, like more abstract elements. And I myself wouldn't know how to even clean this up. Right?
Cool. Awesome. I think I'll share one way to clean it up. One way to clean it up is to kind of draw an abstract system boundary, right? Which is basically to say, anything outside of this boundary is not relevant for our purposes, and anything inside is. So for example, like we know, for example, that say the healthcare system and the employment system interact, right? In terms of like, companies' insurance policies, what happens if someone's becomes disabled while on the job and things like that. But you could just draw a system boundary and say, actually, anything related to employment or unemployment, we're not going to touch. We're just going to talk, or, you know, anything outside, you know, the private health system, we're not going to touch, or anything outside the public health system, we're not going to touch, right? And what that does is that it helps kind of contain the complexity so that again, you're not kind of, you know, spending, you know, 10 days listing out the components, but you're actually, you know, using your time effectively to create something that's helpful enough for you to test and act upon. Because that's really the goal. And that's, I guess, one thing that I learned, but I couldn't kind of talk to, which is the purpose of the system map isn't just to talk about it, it's to act, right? And if you don't get to the act stage, it's not much use. So really what you want to do is just build enough confidence to be able to act, but not kind of wait too long to act, because really the learning comes from the action. Because it's a complex system, you don't know the effect of your action unless you experiment with it.
Abraham,
Yeah.
a question.
Yeah.
When you talk about setting boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
let's say if we take the example of what we were doing right now, the healthcare system. Do you frame the problem first before you start setting boundaries, or you set the boundaries first? Now, if it's setting the boundaries first before framing the problem, then what should be the parameters to set those boundaries? Because you talked about employment, but I wouldn't know if I was doing this exercise. Why am I doing this exercise?
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So should I frame the problem first, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, let's frame a problem together now, right? Or each group can also do it individually, but talk about, maybe that's the first step that we'll do in the next activity. So frame up a problem, right? So for example, like in the US, it might be that there's no universal healthcare, right? So you either get it through your work, or if you don't have work, you're pretty much stuffed. So that might be the problem. Right? Or you might pick whatever other problem, but absolutely, Bishan, you do frame the problem first and then do the system boundaries, but you don't actually this is the core thing, that you don't let that define your thinking, because you could always kind of come back and say, actually, the problem that we've been focused on this whole time is wrong, right? So let's reframe that, and therefore that will define the system boundary. So you never really held tightly by, you know, either the problem framing or the system boundary. Obviously, you want to have good reasons for changing those, but also you do have the freedom of saying, actually, based on the problem, this system boundary is wrong. Let's move it, or let's change it.
Right.
Cool. Awesome. How do you feel about going back? So what we want to do next? Let me share my screen again. What we want to do next is, so we want to talk about the problem first that we want to focus on in this system, and talk about what's the system boundary, and you can write those on post-it notes on Miro or Miro, and then talk about the relationships. I don't know if you'll get to the purpose driving the system or the shared beliefs, but that's okay. If we don't cover it this time, we'll cover it next time. How does that sound? All right. How was that?
Amazing.
Intense.
Amazing. Yeah, that's usually how. Yeah.
I was looking at the other team's map, the circular map, and I am wondering if y'all have like those rings defined, so that it seems like a little bit of an easier way to visualize, with some kind of framework to it.
Yeah, sorry, I started doing that and didn't tell anybody why. But so I've the rings are basically set up to be kind of how closely related the actors in that ring are to kind of the central focus. So our problem statement was around how might we create a healthcare system that prioritizes preventative care over just care when you kind of need it. So at the core of that would be the patient, kind of the one who is being proactive about that preventative care. And then
kind of each ring around that is like, how closely related is that actor to affecting that patient kind of seeking out that preventative care?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, Kristen, because I was like you said, it is easier when you have a framework. I was thinking to talk about frameworks for how you might visualize a complex system. And I'll tell you why I didn't. Why I didn't is because even in the projects where we thought we had a framework to help us, what the most useful way that we actually helped was more emergent. So, we'd map it, and then as we were making sense and we're creating a narrative around it, we'll be like, hold up, this would be more useful if we did this, or this would be, kind of like what group 2 did, where Peter was like, hold up, if we organize the information in this way, it's going to be more helpful for us. But there is specific ways, like, and we can talk about them next time if you're interested, but there is like a value chain way. So for, if we're talking about like design all the way to manufacturing and purchasing, then there's like a value chain. There's like, you could use like a user journey where you kind of input like what forces interact at different times, or at a person's journey through a system. And there's also, that circular one where you're focused on a specific, person or group of people, like patients, and then you're kind of going out of that depending on how close different people and organizations are to that center. But yeah, we can talk about that next week. Cool, awesome. Any other comments or thoughts? Where did you kind of stop, and what would you really like to kind of keep doing next week?
Yeah, I had to step out for a quick minute. While I didn't realize, Peter, you had put the rings up while I had stepped away. I thought you guys all decided to do the bullseye map. But it just kind of speaks, when I came back and everybody was plugging away, if you just did that and we all intuitively knew how to work that and read it, it just speaks to how self-evident that actually is and how it works. I can see working within that rule set until it doesn't work anymore, and then it starts to break down, and you can see how some of those circuits sort of starting to straddle lines, and we've got 3 in the center instead of 1. Like, it will become abstract. That's when the rules don't work anymore. But I think we needed that starting point of, we can't just have a cloud yet. We needed something to stand on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that will absolutely evolve, kind of like your problem framing and the system boundary. You'll get, as you kind of go through the process, you'll get more specific, and you'll change things, and that's okay. Awesome.
I think that, sorry, I was going to say, I think that's one of the difficulties and the challenges of mapping complex systems, is kind of the lens or the perspective you're viewing that system through can kind of help dictate how you want to frame kind of organizing that system. So oftentimes with a system as complex as healthcare, you'll probably have multiple iterations of that to kind of show, like you said, how value flows through it, depending on who the central figure is, or kind of what are the layers of the ecosystem that that system is contained in.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. And I think that's kind of one of the kind of cool things about, I think personally, cool things about systems thinking is that it's okay to kind of keep iterating, and same thing with design thinking. But I think it does take people, especially who kind of weren't born into it or, started their careers into it, it does take a bit of time to kind of, allow themselves the freedom, because often, like you said, Carl, at the beginning, people really want to, stick to an answer. Like, they want to feel like the answer they've given is the answer. But that's not the case with systems thinking and design. All right, cool. So I'm aware we're a bit over time. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to do 2 very quick activities. So the first one is, I'm going to call it One Small Step. I don't know if this is a good name, but we'll see. So basically it's what's one thing that you can commit to this week, based on what you learned today, that you can kind of do, one tangible action that you can do. So for example, at the moment, I'm helping visualize a system and some root causes of a system. So what I'll do this week is, like Kristen said, really focus on like who's the audience for my visualization, and what's the narrative that I'm trying to tell them. So that's my example. It will be good if you write yours down, and then that way next week we'll revisit how we went with that before we start back. Yeah, and I'll just give you a minute to do that. Feel free to share as well, if you'd like. Share what it is that you're going to be doing with the group.
Oh.
I really like yours, Peter, in terms of, just map it quickly and get it in front of people.
Yeah, I'm definitely not following what I'm preaching currently in my job. I've been like sitting around mapping this thing out for so long, and now it's become so big that I'm just overthinking it. And yeah, I think it's kind of I've kind of scared myself now into procrastinating on it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like and I guess it's like some organizations, it's really difficult to kind of show someone something rough. Like people, want to have absolute confidence that you got it sorted. But I've faced that a couple of times when I've been working on projects, and it's surprisingly interesting how quickly you can kind of flip the table and say, not literally flip the table, hopefully, but say, okay, let's kind of do this together, and I'm here to kind of facilitate your thinking. Because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, it doesn't, place you as the expert, because, there's no experts in a complex system, really. I mean, there's health experts and things, but, they're just one cog in the entire machine. But at the same time, it also gives them power and voice to speak, which people generally appreciate. Cool. Awesome. All right. So cool. I think we got, is that everyone? Has everyone done, one small step? Cool. All right. So the last thing we want to do is just a couple of minutes, and you can share this kind of, say it out loud or share it on the feedback. So just 3 questions. What worked well about today's session? What do we need to do better? And what do you want to cover next? So last week we said, it'd be good to kind of keep the conversation going online. That's why we created the Slack channel. And we also said it would be good to kind of share the slides and the resources. So we did that as well. And we said begin with a short summary of previous weeks, which we did that today as well. So yeah, we tried to kind of improve every time. So it'd be good if you, tell us what you think worked well and what we could do better. And Chenyi is giving us a nice photo of his cat.
Oh yeah. he just came up by himself, like I did.
As promised.
That's, yeah. I can't stop him even if I wanted to.
Mm.
Ow.
And it would be good to hear as well from, we've got a few new people today. I think maybe like 5 new people. It'd be good to hear from you what it was like, kind of your first time being here. Kristen and Peter and Rihanna, do you want to share what it's like coming?
Sure. It's always great meeting new people in UX and service design and all that, and sort of learning how people in different contexts tackle similar in different problems. So yeah, that was today was a nice, good first introduction.
Awesome. It's good to have you, Rihanna.
I'll go next. I really appreciate it. Like, at work, whatever, we kind of rehash the same ideas over and over and over again, and it's really nice to hear kind of different perspectives, because we kind of get indoctrinated to the way our organization might approach things. And I really appreciate like the different perspective that this brings, so that I can kind of look at my work with fresh eyes. Really
Awesome.
like that.
Good to hear. Let us know how that goes.
I will.
It can get challenging when you've had a new experience, and then you come back to work with it and you're like, oh, and people are like, no, that's not how we're supposed to do it. No, come back here. Cool. Peter and Ariana, do you want to share anything?
I think it's good to be on the other side of the table, like doing workshops, like being a participant in the workshops and not facilitating them. So it's kind of like refreshing to be like have that perspective, and also like brainstorm with other people even while online. I kind of forgot how that felt. So it's really good and refreshing.
Cool. Glad you said refreshing, not daunting. Awesome. Peter.
I liked how quick everything felt, kind of bouncing in between discussion and action. I think it was helpful in kind of reminding myself that these methods and these frameworks are kind of ambiguous and malleable, instead of focusing too much, like reading the theory and reading all that stuff can kind of become overwhelming of like, how do I do this? And do I make sure I'm doing it right? Where kind of practicing it in these quick ways kind of show you the different approaches that are possible, and not to kind of overthink it.
Awesome. Cool. I saw everyone's comments about focusing on smaller systems, and Bishan, will get you on Slack as well. And Chen Yu, kind of like, how do you actually leverage insights to create something or to change something, as opposed to just stay on high level thinking. So we'll definitely focus on those. So yeah, hope you enjoyed your time today. Please reach out if you have any questions or you need anything. I'm around all week. And yeah, it's good to see everyone again.
Thanks, dude.